Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Greg, it is a pleasure to have you back on the show. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be back.
I wanted to have you on to talk about the Tippit murder because when I reached out to you, you had mentioned that your perspective on the Tippit murder was a lot different than other researchers out there.
Yeah, the more I looked into it, the more it became obvious to me that there was a quite a few issues, but the main one was the possibility that it was a local gang that actually committed the murder. Tippett, that there is uh, hearsay evidence that Tippett was sent to that area to investigate a complaint that was made by phone. Uh, okay, Detective Potts told the Warren Commission that when he came across the street in Delhi Plaza, across Commerce, he was told by Officer Harwood, uh, who asked him, "Did you hear about Tippett getting killed?" I said, "No, I didn't hear about that." He said, "Yes, I understand he got killed on a disturbance call over in Oak Cliff." So he wasn't there for no reason. He was in that specific area, um, according to that anyway, investigating a disturbance call. And my own theory, and that's all it is a theory, is that the disturbance was two members, or one or two members of a local crime gang, taking advantage of the police being out of the area largely, and everyone's attention being diverted by the motorcade, and taking advantage of that to case the area. There was it's not a theory. There was a gang operating in the area of young teens, young 20s, and they included James Markham, who was the son of Helen Markham. Now, Helen and James were cousins to the Patterson brothers, who were part of the Clyde Barrow gang. Um, Now, what happened there was that one of the brothers was executed for murder in prison. The other brother, Floyd, uh, was serving a lengthy stretch for a string of armed robberies, and he was freed in the early 50s, uh, due to at least partly due to the efforts of Sheriff Decker. He actually lobbied for Floyd to be freed. Um, when Floyd was freed, Decker then got him a job with a guy called W.O. Bankston, who had a couple of car automobile sales yards. Um, he was very wealthy and very influential in Dallas, and he gave him work as a night security guard at his car yard. Um, Floyd also took it upon himself to organise uh, more or less youth groups for troubled teenagers to try and keep them out of jail. And he particularly concentrated on guys who were on bail or on remand or things like that to try and keep them out of jail, allegedly. What I think he was really doing was teaching them the tricks of the trade uh, on behalf of Bankston, because Bankston was known to be a link from gangs in the area to to people who could shift the goods. And I think the cops were getting kickbacks from all this. So I think the gangs were left alone largely in Oak Cliff because it was a little money making circle between the cops and Bankston and the gangs. Um,
Well, let's start off with something for people who might not know too much about the Tippit case. And let's just talk about why was Tippit in Oak Cliff if that wasn't his area?
okay, well, according to Detective Potts, who gave evidence to the commission, part of his evidence was that he had heard from another police officer named Harwood that Tippit had been called to investigate a disturbance call. Um,
Again, but that's not his area, though. Why would he be over there and be called to that?
okay, well, again, this is my theory. Okay, I can't prove it, but my theory is that he was not used in the motorcade or for security in Dallas on that day, simply because today he would have been diagnosed with PD, post-traumatic stress disorder, from his war experiences.
Okay.
Um, I've gone through his personnel file, and he basically got in through his military service through the GI Bill. If it wasn't for that, he wouldn't have they wouldn't have accepted him. His psychological profile was absolute horrendous. It was even his father-in-law basically put shit on him and said you know, he's not right in the head since he came back from the war. And he also was poorly educated. His his personnel file indicated that he couldn't even write his own reports. He had to get others to write the reports for him. And he and his partner had also shot a guy dead in a bar simply for I don't know, well, allegedly resisting being taken out of the bar for being too drunk. They reckon that he tried to pull a gun on them, and that's the old excuse that cops use to protect themselves. But he Tippett shot him clean dead, and he was just a drunk.
So Tippit was in that area because he wasn't part of the protection for Kennedy's service, but
Yeah,
he
and that
wasn't one of the many cops that were told to stand down when the presidential motorcade was
yeah,
going through.
and that area would have had a reasonably high crime rate because it was a low income sort of area. So that's a sort of area where you want to have some sort of presence, even at the even at a time like that.
Do
You'd want to have a cop out there somewhere.
do you believe that he was like I've heard theories that he was looking for somebody, that's why he got sent to Oak Cliff, but also do you believe he was corrupt for certain
No, I
instances
believe
like
he was shot because he wasn't corrupt. I think I think what happened was that he drove around the area looking for whoever had created the disturbance. He's pulled one or two young guys up and started questioning them. The cop who normally did that area would have been known to them, and if it had been him, I don't think anything would have happened because he would have known to leave them alone, especially if all the cops were on the take. Okay, but I think that the problem was that they didn't recognise Tippett and panicked because any arrest at all meant that they would go back to prison because they were uh, on remand or whatever.
did you ever ask why he tried to stop the person through the vent window of his car?
I don't know what the. I suspect that protocols back then were a little less stringent than what they are now. But even now, if you even with body cam, if you start looking at police body cams of police operating in America pulling people up in traffic stops, um, you'll see them doing all sorts of stuff that's not according to the book. It's a lot of look. The bottom line is that in America, especially for some reason, your cops are not always well educated. The jobs aren't well paid, and the kick what draws those sorts of jobs is people who aren't so worried about the money; it's the power. So they don't really care what they do or how they act. I mean, honestly, start watching some videos of, of, uh, of traffic stops on YouTube,
I've
and you'll
seen
see.
plenty, trust me, but I've never seen a good cop that's ever tried to stop somebody through a vent window before. It just that was one answer the Warren Commission couldn't even come up with it. They didn't even talk about it that much.
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends what I guess what the nature of the call was. If it was like a disturbance call, usually isn't a very serious matter. So, he might have wound the window down or whatever to tell them to stop, but so he could get out and talk to them or whatever. I don't know. But I, all this stuff that he was well known in the area, I don't believe that for a second because he did actually, in uniform, um, him and the regular cop did look a lot alike. So
Do you know why, if it was a disturbance call, do you know who they were looking for or any descriptions that were given out? I mean, I've seen descriptions of the witnesses to the Tippit shooting talking about it was two people or it was one person, but he was short and a little on the heavy side. But somehow Oswald, or allegedly Oswald, becomes the person that's put into this crime scenario.
yeah. Well, let's dispense with Oswald being in the crime area. Uh, the the official time that they want us to believe for the murder was, I think, 1:15 or 1:16, something like that. Where they get that from is hospital records. The hospital recorded the time of death as 1:15. Now, the recording of the time of death has to be by a doctor who actually is there to witness the death and pronounce the death. If a doctor can't come along and say, okay, well, this guy's just died. I presume he died 15 minutes ago somewhere else
Yeah.
because I wasn't there. That doctor wasn't there to see it. He can only say he's dead now. And this is the time I'm recording his death as. So um, if you look at if you take that 1:15 as the time he was pronounced dead, which you should because that's the way it works, um, then if you go back the time it takes, if you assume that he was killed between 1 o'clock and 1:06, which would be a lot more accurate. Um, if you then look at the time it takes the ambulance to get there, the time to load him and take him off to the hospital, and the time for the doctors to examine him and say, yeah, we can't save him, he's dead, then you get up to 1:15. 1:15 doesn't work if you can't say he was shot dead at 1:15 and also we pronounce him dead at 1:15 at the hospital. It doesn't work
Why is there so much discrepancy on the murder of Tippit when it comes to his death time? Like, if it was just normal cut and dry, you would just have one time. You wouldn't have like 15 different times out there.
because they struggled to get. They had to stretch the time out in order to be able to get Oswald there.
The testimony of Warren Burroughs with 105 is a big issue for the Warren Commission.
I can't remember his testimony as to. As far as I remember, his testimony was he didn't remember Oswald coming in. I know he's spoken to authors since then and given slightly different versions and sold him popcorn and whatever. But I'm skeptical of all these late stories, especially to authors who have a who have an agenda and a book to write and all that. And we don't know what leading questions were asked. We don't know any of that sort of stuff. So, I know we should be skeptical of the Warren Commission testimony, but it is what it is. At least it wasn't. It, it was taken honestly. At least I think at the time.
Well, when it comes to other things that make Oswald not the person who committed this crime, what were some red flags for you?
Mainly the way they played around with that timeline to make sure they could get him there. Um, I mean, I've got Oswald leaving leaving work a lot later than what they say. I've got him catching two buses straight to the Texas Theater because I don't believe he lived at the boarding house, like they say. That became convenient because he had to then pick up a weapon and change his appearance and whatever other crap that they would go on about. But um, that's the trouble with the whole timeline. Once you start trying to look at one small section of it, you then have to start explaining another section which fits into that. And the whole timeline is total bullshit from start to finish.
Yeah.
So you find yourself needing to explain every section just to explain one section.
Well, when it comes to a background on the Dallas Police Department, what did you learn about the Dallas Police Department at the time that helped influence kind of your perspective on the whole Tippit shooting?
Well, like I say, I believe that they were crooked. See, the thing about Decker, especially, he won the sheriff's job with the money provided by a guy called W.O. Bankston, who employed one of the Hamilton boys from from the Clyde Barrow gang, and the person they employed was a cousin to their star witness, um, Helen Markham, and we've also got her son being a member of a local gang, uh, and two other members of that gang being witnesses that were used by the commission. And that was William Smith and uh, Bert. I can't think of the guy's first name, but his surname was Bert. Um, the weird part about their stories is that they were supposed to have been together. They were friends and they were together on that day, but they give two completely different versions of what happened and where they were. So they're my two of my main. I think a lot of it comes back to Helen Markham and William Smith providing alibis for this Burt guy, because he wasn't actually brought in to give testimony in front of the commission. They just obtained a statement from him, and they should have brought him in because his statement was completely at odds with what his friend said. So
Well, maybe you can explain a little bit about who Helen Markham is and then some of her associations with her son being involved in gang activity.
okay, well let's start at a point past the assassination. Um, the sons were spoken to by Marguerite Oswald and her entourage, which I believe included some lawyers and investigators. Now he talked to them and gave them a story, as it were. Um, Next thing you know, the cops turned up at Helen's home to arrest him. They claimed the place was full of stolen goods. He was on parole, so they were going to send him straight back to jail. Um, the house they were in was a two-story place. He was thrown from a second floor window, broke his leg, um, and threatened over all the stolen goods that were allegedly in the house. All after speaking to Margaret Oswald. So I think you can draw your own conclusions about why they paid that visit to him.
Mhm.
I think it was a very not very subtle threat to basically shut your mouth.
Well, throwing him out a window is a pretty good threat.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He um he ended up dying in prison and was buried in a pauper's grave at Huntsville prison. So I'm assuming that he was pretty much became estranged from his family after all this. But I think it comes back to protecting at least one member of that gang. as being the perpetrator, and the cops were quite happy to pin the blame on Oswald because it gave them a way of uh, uh, charging him with something, even if they didn't. They claimed they had all this evidence against him for Kennedy, but they knew it was all garbage, so they tried to get him on Tippit.
Well, what evidence did they have against Oswald for killing the officer Tippit?
It was all circumstantial
They claimed later that he had a wallet at the scene that had an Alec Heidel ID in
no,
it or
they
something.
didn't claim that. That was uh, claimed by Hosty and a couple of others years later. I'll tell you what happened there. There was a news cameraman on the scene. Have you ever been involved in a news story?
Yes.
Okay, well, you possibly know then that they like to recreate scenes. They like to
Yeah.
pose people. They like to set the scene or whatever, and have you doing things that they think are going to look good for the camera and for their news story, things which aren't necessarily true. So what what he took a film of was three or four cops crowded close together, rifling through a a wallet, which he later described on the news as belonging to Tippit, because I think he was just confused, um, and which later Hosty claimed was Oswald's wallet with all the ID in it and all that crap, but which was more likely uh, belonged to another witness, because what happened was that the cab driver and one of the car yard salesmen took off in pursuit of the person seen fleeing the scene, and they grabbed Tippett's weapon to pursue him with. They failed to catch up with him, and they were brought back by a security guard. Now, when they were brought back, it was it was assumed that at least one of them was the perpetrator, that they'd actually got the guy, and one of them was the guy. So they were handed over to, I think, Croy originally. He had no authority as a uh, pretend cop, a what do you call it, a reserve cop. So he had to hand them over to the real cops, and that's where they decided to check through his wallet to see who he was.
Did you think about this Tippit shooting being odd characteristics for Oswald? I always found it strange how they said that he fired 3 shots, but the last shot was like a turnaround headshot, like a gang execution, which to me was like, I mean, that doesn't sound anything like the Oswald that, or whatever Oswald you want to say. None of them depicted match that.
Uh, well, with the headshot, I think there was only one witness to that, and I think he was another late coming witness. So not sure about the headshot or when that was, but if you're talking about after he was already on the ground and he allegedly shot him again,
Yeah.
is that, yeah, not sure that that happened that way. But again, just because I don't trust late coming witnesses. But does it sound like Oswald? No, none of it sounds like Oswald. You look at his whole escape according to the official record. Um, according to Marianne Baker, who allegedly encountered him on the second floor, Oswald was cool, calm, and collected. Wasn't didn't appear worried. Wasn't sweating. Wasn't you know nervous or anything like that. Then he leaves. He's allegedly on a bus laughing like a maniac, which draws the attention of an alleged past uh, um, boarding house owner where he allegedly lived, who becomes a witness against him on the bus. He leaves the bus, gets a cab. The cab driver says he wasn't in a hurry. He actually described him as looking like a drunk coming off a 2 day binge. It looked like he'd been sleeping in his clothes, but he wasn't worried, wasn't perturbed about anything, wasn't in a hurry, didn't speak much, blah, blah, blah. Then he gets to Tippit, gets so nervous he shoots Tippit, or so worried about whatever that he shoots Tippit. Before that, he's allegedly seen by Erling Roberts, and he's in a hurry at that stage. Not in a hurry getting the cab, but once he gets to the boarding house, suddenly he's in a hurry. Um, he gets to the where the shops are and the theatre is, and according to John Brewer at the shoe shop, he looks scared, worried about something, blah blah blah, and then during he gets arrested, tries to fight his way out of it. I think he was fighting for his life. I think that's why he fought. Um, but Officer McDonald was then interviewed by the press or the radio. I'm not sure which it was, but he told them that Oswald was calm, cool, and collected, even though he fought, whatever. But that's what he said. He said he was calm, cool, and collected. So you've got him. Every witness has him alternating between being calm, cool, and collected, and being a maniac or being scared or being this or that.
Well, that can just be a fault of the Dallas police at the time too, because the Dallas police guy gave an interview and said that Oswald pulled out a shotgun and in the theater. And we all know that Oswald didn't have a shotgun in the theater.
I've never heard that he pulled out a shotgun. That's interesting, but I think he would have soon dropped that from his rhetoric because A, it wasn't true, and B, it was easily disproven. So,
Yeah, what I'm saying is that that's what the Dallas police did was try and hype up the record. Do you believe there was a lot of that going on? I mean, even if you see the interview with the Dallas police officer who allegedly twisted his ankle in the balcony of the theater, he's kind of hyping it up like he fell in the line of duty twisting his ankle trying to arrest Oswald. It was just like, dude, you twisted your ankle in a seat. A lot of it was DPD hype.
yeah, yeah, it was. I mean, um, there were about four on top of him. There was another reporter in the balcony at the time of the arrest, a guy called Ewans or Ewers, something like that, and he 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 wrote a report in February, I think, when the Warren Commission was being uh, formed, and he said in that report that was published by the Dallas Morning News or one of those local papers that as he was looking down, he could see them all on top of Oswald, and one of them actually poked a shotgun through all the bodies at Oswald's head, and he doesn't say it outright, but he you can tell he was thinking that the guy was going to kill him without a shadow of a doubt, and that's when Oswald starts screaming out, "I'm not resisting arrest," and I think that's when they decided they can't kill him because there's too many witnesses who will confirm that they heard him say that he's not resisting.
Now, do you think he went to the theater because of the spy tactic thing where he was meeting a contact?
No, it's a good story, but nah.
But he was getting up sporadically and sitting next to random
No,
people
that's
in the
according to
theater.
one person who, again, was a late arriving witness, who probably said whatever the author wanted them to say. I'm not buying shit that comes late. Even if it's true, I think it's safer not to buy it.
Well, why did Oswald go to the theater then?
Watch a movie. My own theory is that um, he Bruce Payne testified that he had given Marina $10 to buy her and Marina when were going to go shoe shopping that afternoon. Um, Now there are actually three shoe shops near the Texas Theatre. I don't know how many there were at Irving, but I doubt there were any at all at that stage. Um, so my feeling is that they had arranged to come uh, to Oak Cliff to buy the shoes for Marina, meet Oswald there, and then head back to Irving together. But I think Oswald has phoned at some stage to say that he works over because of what's happened. Um, I think he's asked, can he get them to come early and meet him earlier than what they planned? And I think Ruth has said, no, we can't do that, blah, blah, blah. Why don't you watch a movie? And by the time the movie's over, it'll be time that, we'll be there by that time, sort of thing. So I think something like that's happened.
Now, do you have any documentation from Ruth or anybody that states that she told Oswald to go watch a movie or anything?
No, I'm putting two and two together because he allegedly said during the interrogations that he went straight to the movies by catching two buses, no stop off anywhere, and also Ruth Payne saying that they were going to go shopping. That he'd given Marina $10 for shoes, and they had planned to go shopping that afternoon. And it seems to me um, Oswald was also been looking for a new apartment in the Oak Cliff area. So it seemed to me a good place for them all to meet up. And when the assassination happened, he's left early. They can't meet him early. He goes and sees a movie while he's waiting for him.
Well, why did Brewer think he was suspicious? I mean, he was the one that really pushed for asking people, hey, did that guy buy a ticket? And then he went into the theater and met up with Burroughs, who eventually tried looking for him.
Um, well, I'll tell you, the it was I think a couple of weeks before Brewer and Postal made statements. Why is that? They were key witnesses. Why did it take a couple of weeks to make statements? Getting their heads right, getting the story right.
Yeah, but their story doesn't really fit Oswald either. Like, it doesn't fit the Warrens Commission version that he went into a theater, didn't pay into a ticket, and tried to hide out in the theater.
Okay, th- you're sort of looking at it from a perspective where we are now, but at the time they were saying all sorts of shit um, like a lot of it seemed like they were ripping stuff out of big grade movies. Really, honestly, that's how bad it was. Um, even Laville, when Oswald was shot, sort of does this sort of thing, like a
Yeah.
bad ham actor. And it's, you know, there's stuff that seems to have been, the movie Suddenly.
No.
Okay, well, it's a movie about an assassination attempt. Um, there's stuff from that movie that seems to have been ripped off for the Oswald timeline. Um, but if you haven't seen the movie, there's not much point in trying to explain it. But um, one of the quickly, one of the things that happened in the movie was that a cop was shot. Um, I don't know how coincidental that is, but whatever. Um, the the shooter was in a house high on a hill. Um, he was sitting there casually eating lunch. Now, what did they say about Oswald? Do you know what was said about Oswald? Wade told the press that he had been sitting there eating lunch, casually waiting for the kill shot, and that's what exactly the. It's a complete rip off from that movie. They, they've just ripped bits and pieces from everywhere to sort of try and cobble the story together that made him look guilty without considering whether that sort of fitted Oswald's personality or how long that would stick for. I don't think they cared because they didn't operate on any high level of sophistication. We're talking about the Dallas cops here. They had the whole justice system so hogtied in Dallas they could get away with anything. It didn't matter. Why Oswald was killed in this case was because they knew they couldn't get away with that shit in front of the world media.
Well, they also might have just arrested a man who had nothing to do with anything that they're saying that he did, and they realized that, so all they had to do was double down on it because they cared so much about their conviction rates.
Yeah, well, you're on the right track there for sure. Um, the, I mean, there's an FBI document um, about the Dallas Morning News contacting the FBI asking for Hoover to give a quote on Fritz because he had a he cleared. Now listen to these numbers. He allegedly had cleared 656 murders out of 666 over a 10-year period. That's 10 that he didn't get out of 666. It's a 98% success rate. Not even with modern forensics do you get anywhere near that. The best police departments in the world struggle to get a 60% clearance, but his was 98.
Well, I'm sure that's what a lot of those police officers did back then, like the LAPD during the RFK case and everything. They lied about what they do and what their careers are. I think it was Jim Lavelle, or I don't think it was Jesse Curry, but stated that Jack Ruby had no police connections. And we know that's a damn lie. The Warren Commission looked and appointed all the people that testified saying they knew Jack Ruby.
Well, Fritz was one that denied knowing Ruby, but there were two very good witnesses who said otherwise. We've got Robert Lee Shawman, who was a musician who hung out at the Carousel Club in 1961. He told the FBI after the assassination that he always saw cops in the club, but the only one that he knew by name was an older detective named Fritz, who he used to see sitting at a table in the club.
Now, was Tippit ever associated with Jack Ruby?
It's a moot point. Allegedly, when Ruby heard about the Tippit killing, he was extremely upset until he learned that it was JD and not another guy named Tippit, with a slightly different spelling. I think it was ET instead of IT at the end. But he thought it was that Tippit, who I can't think of what his first name was. But apparently he was a good guy, well liked, blah 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 blah. And it was only when he learned it was JD that he cheated up, that didn't know the guy didn't care. So yeah, I don't think he. All this stuff about Tippett being at the club again, it's good fodder for people who want to write fiction, but there's no basis for it, none.
What what about the gang? Let's break down some of the gang involvement in Dallas at the time. I do want to talk about some of your deep investigations. If you go into a point on a certain individual, just feel free to explain the whole background and how you came across the information you came across with them. I haven't really talked about ever the gang stuff that was going on with the Dallas police, but there are some instances where people and things like the headshot to Tippit that does seem more gang related than it does um, Lee Harvey Oswald.
Well, the guy that I have come to suspect the most was this Burt guy. Um, uh, he was actually AWOL from the army, um, so he had a lot going on, a lot. Um, and William Smith was also on parole for car theft, um, which was Floyd Patterson's, Floyd Hamilton's one of his specialties. And I think again, I think that's what they got Floyd out of jail for, was to come and teach these guys the tricks of the trade of how to do break-in enters and how to steal cars. Um, and just sidetracking myself for a little bit, um, going back to Fritz. Fritz was offered promotions several times and always knocked them back. And again, I can't prove it, but to me, the reason he was knocking it back was because he was making more money where he was through kickbacks. The higher up you go, the less connection you have to the street people, the less chance you've got of getting some of that extra dough.
More of a chance
Um,
being set in an office somewhere rather than being on the street able to meet your contacts.
yeah, yeah. So I'm absolutely positive that Decker and Fritz were on the take from these gangs, um, and I think that's why Decker lobbied to get Floyd out of jail so that he could sort of be a guardian for them, look after them, and teach them how to do the break and all editors and all that sort of stuff. Um, and to bring this full circle, the guy that pardoned him was the other guy that was hit in the motorcade, the governor. Uh,
Governor Connolly?
what was his name again? Sorry,
Governor Connolly?
that's him. Yeah, yeah, Connolly. He was the guy that pardoned Floyd, uh, um, based on a lot of effort by Decker and a few other people. Um, so I think they had a nice little business going. Decker, by the way, was never. Uh, he was sponsored uh, by um, by W.O. Bankston in his run for office as sheriff. After he got in, he was never ever. No one ever ran against him until he retired. A 30-odd year career or whatever as sheriff, unopposed. No one was going to touch these guys.
So you believe the whole thing, a lot of things that come, obviously there's problems with the Warren Commission. I think we're all kind of critics of the Warren Commission, but you believe overall this was a major Dallas police investigation that was kind of bungled and they realized it was bungled and they had to try and cover it up somehow.
Yeah, I mean, it gets a bit sketchy trying to drill down too far at, with with what we've got. But my own feeling is that Oswald said a few things. He said he was a patsy. He said they only picked me up because I lived in Russia. Um, um, and he asked for a, a, a lawyer called John Apt. Now, originally, what we know is that they were trying to draw up sedition uh, charges against Oswald, which fits with they only picked me up because I was in Russia. And that's why he's asking for Apt, because Apt defended members of the Communist Party against those charges. So that made sense if you follow that. And he stopped asking for Apt, who had never tried a murder case in his life. He was strictly uh, federal a federal charges guy looking at sedition and all that sort of stuff. Um, he stopped asking for Apt and started asking for anyone to come forward as soon as they charged him with Tippit, because he knew then that it was more than sedition that, that they were hitting him with. And the only reason that happened was because the White House had called them off. They said you can't do that. You've got to charge him as a lone nut for the murders. And I think that's why they weren't worried initially about where Oswald was in the building, because they weren't charging him with the murder. They were just charging him as being part of what they called the international communist conspiracy. Um, and that was the actual wording they put on the paperwork, the international communist conspiracy, before they had to tear it up. So I think that's where it started. Initially, they didn't care where he was in the building. They didn't have to try and prove anything, except that he was part of the Communist Party and and part of the plot. That's where they were heading initially.
What about when they did have to prove that Oswald was in that building?
Okay, well that's when they started. Sorry, bugs flying around. Australia's a dangerous place, mate. You got to watch the bugs. Um, that's when they started coercing witnesses and started to have to try and put a timeline together that got him out of the building in time to get to Oak Cliff in time, to get to the Tippit murder scene in time, and all that sort of stuff. So um, I think a lot of things fell in their lap. The Whaley coming forward fell in their lap. That helped them because it got him to Oak Cliff quicker. But it's pretty obvious to me that Whaley said himself, my passenger was a drunk coming off a 2-day bender, and he'd been sleeping in his clothes, and I dropped him off um, several blocks from where you say Oswald was living. I think that's because the drunk that he had in his car lived several blocks in another boarding house away. But he thought it looked like Oswald, so he's been telling everyone it was Oswald. The cops find out, bring him in, and bang, they've got Oswald to the crime scene quicker through a cab.
See, my theory on that is I think Oswald looks suspicious because he did look like shit, but it was mostly because wasn't he separated from Marina at that time? He had been living at another place and he hadn't seen the kids, and Oswald was actually a pretty good parent.
That's the official story, but I don't believe that either, mate. So
I thought the official story said that he was like a wife beater.
yeah, yep. That all came from the White Russian community. But again, there was a bit of Chinese whispers about it. I think she had a bruise on her at one stage, and that became Oswald beating her or something, and it got the rumor mill started around the white community, and it became a fact from seeing her once with a bruise.
Well, why do you think the Tippit murder is so important to the assassination of John F. Kennedy? Do you think it gets people to the level of, well, if he killed a cop, then he obviously killed the president?
No, I think it became. I think they had to find someone else to blame for the Tippit murder because, like I say, I think it was gang members that they
Yeah,
were
but
were
gang
taking
members
money
don't
off.
get mentioned in the Warren Commission. So for the general public, though, the what solidified to them was the murder of Tippit, because if he can kill a cop, he could kill the president.
You know, I think that was part of their thinking. I think they wanted to avoid um, blaming who it really was because that would come back on them. That might expose their little extracurricular activity with getting money from these gangs. Um, it was also a way of being able to charge Oswald with something while they sorted out what else they were going to do with him.
Well, do you think Jack Ruby was hired to take out Lee Harvey Oswald by the Dallas police?
Jack Ruby was a a police um, a police groupie. He yeah yeah
That's what I believe. I do believe that he was used.
yeah. And but it wasn't by the mob or anyone else. It was the Dallas cops. Um,
Well, of course, because Jack Ruby's in the press conference and he had been there like the whole weekend, apparently acting like he was part of the press.
there was a Dallas lawyer called Travis Kirk who moved to San Francisco after the assassination. He had also worked for Henry Wade's office before becoming a defense lawyer in Dallas, and he told the FBI that um, he knew for a fact that um, Fritz knew Ruby, and that he could well imagine that Fritz was capable of organising uh, Oswald's death just to get the stat, just to close the case.
What about Jesse Curry's involvement in all this?
Jesse Curry, I think, was a halfway decent sort of guy, as 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 shown by his book, where he basically admits that they couldn't put
Yeah.
Oswald in the sixth floor window. But I think he couldn't control Fritz. uh, and I don't think again he was someone who was terribly bright either. Um, I think Fritz literally got away with blue murder and run rings around all these people. I told you before about the Dallas Morning News writing to Hoover, wanting Hoover to give a quote because they wanted to do this great story on Fritz about how great he was at putting people away. So, excuse me. Hoover actually refused to do it because Fritz at that stage had a very poor uh, profile with the FBI. They hated him, and they also said that he didn't cooperate with his own detectives or anyone else, and he was a media hog. He was always seeking the limelight, even in cases that he had no jurisdiction in.
Well, that's why I said about the shotgun. That came from a clip. It's on Helmer Reenberg's YouTube channel. It was when Fritz speculated or said that Oswald had a shotgun. But Fritz made a lot of statements to the press that, if you looked at them, they weren't true. They were kind of like he knew that there was this arrest going on, but he didn't actually know the details, and he wasn't involved in actually being there to do anything.
What you'll notice with the police in this case, and perhaps in other cases, I don't know, but in this case in particular, what happens is that as soon as they get caught in a lie, they immediately change the story and pretend that what they said before was never said. It's just wiped. It's, and they do the same with witnesses. They took a witness statement with a witness saying XYZ. Then by the time they get to the Warren Commission, their story is ABC, and it's completely forgotten that they originally said XYZ. You know, the new lie supersedes the old lie, and we shall never repeat the old lie.
I'm with you.
Yeah, well, that's basically how it worked. The Baker's story, Marion Baker's story about the second floor lunchroom is a classic example. Um, in his original affidavit, he said it was on the third or fourth floor. No mention of any lunchroom, um, and a completely wrong description of Oswald. Um, he was kept away from the while all the other cops were busy talking to the press and bullshitting their way to be um, media stars or whatever they were trying to be. Um, Baker never once appeared in the media. He was kept away from everyone until his star turn at the Warren Commission, and then he's on board with the official story about the lunchroom on the second floor. Now, in any honest sort of investigation, the Warren Commission would have asked him, but you originally said, it was the third or fourth floor. You don't mention any lunchroom. You say it was Oswald now that you met, but the description you gave at the time isn't Oswald at all. And you even had the advantage of having Oswald sitting in the room when you gave that statement. So you could look at him and describe him as he was sitting there, but you didn't even do that. None of that happened, and it should have.
Well, we also know in a normal police investigation, I know it wasn't mandatory for cops to do this at the time, but someone should have at least grabbed a recording and tried to get some type of confession out of Oswald, and none of them did that. We have Hostie's notes, and we have, I think, Fritz left notes as well too, but even those didn't turn up until way later.
I think Fritz was a bit annoyed by the fact that he had a room full of uh, federal officials. It meant that he couldn't operate the way he normally did. What he would normally do was what he allegedly did with Fraser, threatened him, stick a written statement in front of him to sign, and sign it, or you're going to get some of this.
Do you think mostly he was probably used to the fact that when he arrested somebody, there wasn't a bunch of media trying to get questions out of the guy?
Yeah, well, it didn't matter. The local media were in thrall of Fritz. They all thought he was a superstar. Okay, that's the Dallas media. So wouldn't have mattered what Fritz did. He was a champion. They weren't going to change his mind about that. The judges were all on board. Most of the defense lawyers were all shit scared of the DA's office. You know, the whole system was rigged completely. Um, but with a case like this, where they had not just the local media, they had the national media and the international media there watching it, and they knew they couldn't get away with that shit in those circumstances. So, the only way to close the case was to kill Oswald.
What about some of the things that come to evidence against Oswald when it's like fingerprints? Me and Bart have talked at length about that, but obviously that they had control over a little bit of evidence, and you saw them parading out certain fingerprints and certain things like that in the middle of their headquarters to the press.
Well, I'll tell you some of the tricks they did in regard to evidence. Fritz ordered that Oswald be re-fingerprinted, even though it had already been done, and also have the paraffin test done together in his office. Now, they had a separate forensics room to do all that stuff, but he insisted it had to be done in his office. And the reason for that is that um, they used an inkless pad, which was full of iodine, iodized material. Um, and so you couldn't actually see it, but it was there on your fingers, remained on your fingers. So there was no washing facilities in Fritz's office. So they were told to do the paraffin test second, do the fingerprints first. What that did was make sure that Oswald would fail the paraffin test on his fingers and palm, because the stuff in the ink was the same iodized material that would show up, and it's in the test they were using. It can't differentiate between um, ions that have come from from uh, from fingerprint ink or from a gun. They can't differentiate, so it could be either. It could also come from a lot of other areas, but by fingerprinting, they made sure that he would fail that test on his hands, and that's exactly what happened. And he was also told they also they were also told to test his cheeks. And as the guy who did the test testified to the Warren Commission, we've never done that before because there's no way this stuff gets on the cheek from a rifle. And I think Fritz knew that, but he wanted it done uh, so that he could turn around and tell the press that Oswald failed the paraffin test without specifying that he only failed on his hands, on his cheek, and the press would automatically assume that he failed both. So he was being at the same time as they were trying to bullshit their way through with evidence. Um, they were also basically getting him tried through the media, through the local media.
But why would they give him the chance to speak? I mean, he was in the same clip you mentioned earlier that he mentioned that he lived in the Soviet Union. The little bit before that, in that same clip, he talked about that he denied these charges and that he wasn't being charged with killing the president. He was being charged with killing a cop.
Yeah, that's
Why would they give him so much airtime? They even gave him a minute at the press conference to be able to say some words to the.
well, that I mean, they couldn't avoid that in the as he was being led down the hall. Reporters were going to ask questions, and they didn't want to keep the media out because the media was complaining long and loud about not having access, um, and especially not be able to get decent photos of him. So that's what the midnight press conference was supposedly only an opportunity to get photos. They weren't supposed to ask him questions there. As soon as he started asking for a lawyer, that's when they hooked him off stage and dragged him off and charged him with the JFK murder. he wasn't given free rein to talk. As I say, as soon as he started asking for legal help,
Legal representation.
yeah, that was the end of the press conference. As soon as he said that.
Why do you think they made such a big noise about Tippit being killed? A lot of people say that they were trying him for being a cop killer, but do you think they actually really cared about Tippit dying, or they're just using it?
Well, I'll say a couple of things about that. No, I don't think they cared about Tippett dying, because, like I said before, I think he was more a bird. He'd been 10 or 11 years in the force without ever getting any sort of promotion. That should tell you everything about what he was like. Um, and like I said, he couldn't fill out reports because he was only semi-literate, and he was reported as being nervous all the time in his psych reports when he first joined. Um, so I don't think they cared about him. What they said about caring about him, about uh, he's our brother and all that. We've got to do something about this. That's all for the press. That's because that's how they expected to react. Um, and that's all for show. If they gave a rat's patootie about a cop killing, have you seen the thin blue line?
No.
Okay, some of the same cops were involved in that. It was a few years later, but some of the same cops were involved in that. It's a documentary showing that a wrong person was arrested and charged with a cop killing. Uh, the story with that is that the cops actually knew who did it. It was a young 16-year-old who'd given a lift to a hitchhiker, and the hitchhiker was an adult, and they charged him because he was an adult that he could get the death penalty. 16-year-old couldn't. Okay, so they didn't give a rat's ass about the cop that was killed. All they cared about was getting someone to the electric chair.
Are they really that bored in Dallas where they need to get someone killed?
I, that's what I said at the start. The I don't know why, but in America, you seem to have very low. Um,
What stats are you looking at for this? The cops are not like this anymore.
really? I'll show you some videos later.
I'd love to see some of these videos. I know plenty of cops, and I could tell you none of them are like that.
Well, I'm not saying they're all like that. There are good ones. There are good ones, obviously, but no, they didn't care about Tippett in particular. I'm sure they were glad to be rid of him, to be honest with you. And what happened in that case was, again, the if they really cared about arresting the killer of that cop in the 68 murder that I'm talking about, um, they would have charged the 16-year-old for it. But they didn't because they couldn't friggin' fry him for it. He was too young.
Well, do you believe that they were covering up the murder of Tippit because they knew who the actual person was who did it, and they used Helen Markham as their star witness because they had leverage over her because her son was involved in gang activity?
Yeah, yes. That's why she was such a mess. She knew her son was involved with these guys. They probably threatened to do something with her son, revoke his parole or whatever. Um, her, her her warrant commission testimony, honestly, Monty Python couldn't have done a better job of making it hilarious because unfortunately it is. It's hilarious. She just keeps saying over and over again, "I didn't recognise any of them," and they're trying to feed her all the lines she's supposed to say, and she finally gets it and finally says the right thing. But my God, it took some time to get it out of her. She was just all over the place, and even when they took it to the lineup, Fritz had to put ammonia under her nose to snap her out of it. She was hysterical.
What do you think
And
about
this is a woman who grew up with members. of the freaking Bonnie and Clyde gang. You know,
What do you
why would this worry out so much?
what do you trust about when it comes to the testimony of Warren Reynolds?
Why you talking about the guy that was shot at
Yeah.
later, or that's is that where you're coming
Yeah.
to that, or
I said yeah.
yeah, yeah. I've got no opinion about that. Th these guys were shady as fuck. Um,
Being shady doesn't mean you deserve to be shot at.
they can get you shot at, and especially in somewhere like Dallas. That, that's why Parkland was such a good place to be taken if you were shot, because they were so had so many dealt with so many gunshot wounds. You know, I mean, it's so it might have been related to the Tippit thing, but we don't know for sure. You know, and I don't think it's necessary to say it was to make a case for anything. You know, I'd like some strong evidence to include it in any case I put forward. I think you know there's a lot of a lot of long bows that get drawn in this case.
Well, what's your overall conclusion when it comes to the importance of the Tippit murder? You think it highlights more about the Dallas police at the time? And if you start to dig a little bit deeper into what was going on in Dallas, that there's a lot of evidence to prove that it
I think there's a deeper story there that has nothing to do with the assassination.
just another murder in Dallas?
Yeah, I mean that's what they said about the JFK killing. Laville allegedly said at one stage it's like a South Dallas end killing.
Well, that's also because Dallas police were Birchers.
Yeah, yeah. I think well, you want to talk about Birches, Roy Truly, who hired Oswald, um, let him leave the building, and then reported him missing, was married to a cousin of the guy who turned the original John Birch into a spy, Claire Chenault. I don't know how much you know about this, the backstory to the Birch Society,
Mm-mm.
but it was named after a guy called John Birch, who they claim was the first victim of the Cold War. Claire Chenault was a an American general who headed the Flying Tigers in China to try and keep mainland China from going communist. Um, he had spies on the ground. One of them was a missionary called John Birch, and he was killed by the communists. And back home in America, they decided to name the society after him, the John Birch Society. So that's where that came from. And that all came from Claire Chenault, who truly, as I say, was married to a cousin of his. So,
I think we agree on some things and we disagree on some things. I definitely both think we both agree on Dallas police corruption. Um, to an extent, I don't know what their extent would be. Just I think they had a lot more involvement when it came to getting rid of Oswald and then obviously arresting Oswald and using that. But I also think they're a little bit more afraid of the Warren Commission coming down onto them and all their agencies investigating them with Oswald in their custody for longer. So I think there had to be a point they had to wrap it up.
yeah, I wouldn't argue with that logic. It's,
Okay.
but I think if you're saying that the Dallas police were the ones that hired Ruby or got Ruby to do it, yeah, we agree.
Yes.
Um, I mean, you're sort of stretching it a bit further out and saying, you know, because of the Warren Commission or this or that. I'm just saying it's because they couldn't take it to court because they would be exposed for the corrupt bastards they were.
I'd go with that too. I'd go with that too.
Six to one, half dozen the other. Same result. Oswald dead.
I think there's a lot of things about Tippett that's a little bit more suspicious that you seem like you don't really think are possibilities. Like I don't know why he'd stop someone through a vent window, unless he knew the guy.
Who's the witness that said he did that? That was Helen, wasn't it?
I don't think it was Helen. I
Helen
thought that
Markham.
was in the Warren Commission.
Well, the Warren Commission could only use the testimony of, of the witnesses, so it had to come from one of the witnesses.
Either it was the Warren Commission or the House Select Committee on Assassinations that said that Tippit stopped somebody through his vent window. It's part of the official story. It's not anything that's like added from a
Well, but yeah, okay,
book or
but it has to
anything.
come from somewhere.
Oh, I know that, but I'm saying that apparently, let me just look up real quick just to make sure I got this proof for. At approximately 1:15 p.m., Tippit, who was cruising east on 10th Street, passed the intersection of 10th and Patton, about 8 blocks from where he had reported at 12:54 p.m. About 100 feet past the intersection, Tippit stopped a man walking east along the south side of Patton. See Commission Exhibit number 1968, page 164. The man's general description was similar to the ones broadcast over the police radio. Tippit stopped the man and called him to his car. He approached the car and apparently exchanged words with Tippit through the right front or vent window. Tippit got out and started walking to the front of the car. As Tippit reached the left front wheel, the man pulled out a revolver and fired several shots. 4 bullets hit Tippit and killed him. I do believe he stopped somebody through the vent window, but you're saying a witness said that?
Well, it has to have come from a witness. It could, I mean, how do they know that that's what happened? Unless a witness told them.
Unless they do something like several witnesses said, then they don't have to pick a specific.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you'll find there was one witness, and that was Helen. Mrs. Markham, I saw the man come over by the car very slow, leaned and put his arms just like this. He leaned over in the window and looked in this window. She was the only witness for that. No one else said that.
Again, right front vent window. Why does that sound like he's leaning through the actual window? The vent is a little triangle thing in the front of the window. It can't be Helen then.
Well, I think they changed the vent. Uh,
Why would they mess with their star witness's testimony?
why not? She doesn't care.
You don't know that. She seemed like she was very appalled at the death of Tippit. She had her hands over her face the whole time.
Yep.
When we talk about the actual assassination, why is it so important that you like, because it's obviously you get to a point, especially like for me, I've been talking about it for a couple of years now. You get over the basics of the assassination, you start to really kind of pick away the details that go in there, which is where you come in and you start finding out backgrounds about certain individuals and connections, either whether it's gang related or whether it's just criminal ethical issues that happen to do with Dallas Police Department.
Well, that's just the way I operate. I long ago stopped reading books on the assassination, um, and looking at documentaries about it, and just go with the evidence as I find it. Um, a lot of it, I admit, is gut instinct, where I might find a piece of evidence over here about a particular person and keep that in the back of my mind. And years later, I'll find something else and think, that goes back to what I found a few years ago. And, I can join it up. Um, my gut instinct about Oswald's alibi has been vindicated. I was the only person uh, coming forward to say Oswald had a valid alibi, and that was 20 years ago. Everything that's been found since has validated that, including up to and including Hostie's notes. So, yeah, I don't know what to say except I have stripped everything back. I haven't started with any preconceived notions. Um, I wouldn't give a rat's patootie if my conclusion led me to, or if the evidence led me to believe Oswald did it. if he did it, he did it. I'm completely fine with that. But the evidence doesn't point that way. The evidence points that he had a valid alibi, and that's what I'm spending my time trying to get across to people. That all the chasing of theories and trying to retrofit a case against your favorite bad guy is just a parlor game to me, and I
Why does
won't
it
take part in it.
why does it matter so much who took the shots? How about we just get a record of everything that the Warren Commission was wrong about?
Exactly. That's
Weisberg was the only researcher that I've come across that has actually stated that that's all that matters is showing that the
well, there
investigation
you've got
was
two saying
shit.
that. So now you've got two saying that,
That's true.
and there is a young guy in Scotland who works along the same paradigm. A guy
What,
called
Scott
Johnny
Reed?
Cairns.
Oh,
No,
Johnny
Johnny
Cairns.
Cairns. Yeah, yeah,
Because I think it's pretty easy to show just through documentation that obviously what they knew in 63 has changed a whole hell of a lot since 2020 or 2024.
yeah. But I mean, if you get what annoys me is people think reading a conspiracy book constitutes evidence that they found. It's not. It's a fucking book, and usually one built on sand. Um, there's there's plenty of ways to view a case. There's plenty of evidence and background detail you can get outside of books, outside of the Warren Commission, outside of the Warren Commission volumes. I've found evidence uh, in memoirs that weren't about the assassination, but in the memoirs, there's stuff that was useful to the investigation of the assassination. Like one guy wrote a book about his experiences in Moscow as an exchange student, and he told the story in the book about going to a friend's wedding. One of the other students married a local girl, and he at the wedding he gravitated to the only person there that was wearing a suit, and he just happened to be a an American official from the embassy, and the official told him that this was the second wedding of an American to a local Russian girl that he'd been to in recent times. He said the other one was out at Minsk, Oswald,
Yeah.
and yet officially the American embassy denied knowing that Oswald got married. But here's this guy saying that he was told that there was an official at that wedding from the American embassy.
Well, one thing I do want to highlight here on a wrapping point, because we have been talking for a little bit, but is that you do have an extensive understanding of Oswald's military uh, background when it comes to where he was stationed at, and kind of his whole thing when it really relates to just more Cold War aspects. And then when it comes to your site as well, too, the reopened Kennedy case, it's a forum that really discusses a lot of issues and certain things about the case and to debunk certain theories as well too. I mean, that's important for just anyone who's interested in looking into it. I mean, like we said, 2 years ago, I was first learning about the whole thing, and you gave me the time to talk about certain instances of the case, and it gets to a point eventually where you're looking just for new tidbits and new information because you're still interested in it. But how long do you keep rehashing the same old thing over and over again?
Well, look, I'm sitting on a whole bunch of new stuff, okay, while I try and figure out the best way to present it. Um, there's new stuff to be found. There is. Anyone who say anyone who says that there's nothing new that can be discovered in this case is just plain wrong. Um, and that will come out when I can find the best way to get this stuff out.
Another book?
It's a last resort, yeah. I'm
As a
looking at
last resort? What do you mean last resort? I want another book.
because then I have to write it.
Oh
And I
God.
am. I I actually am. I'm currently rewriting the first book with updated material that needs to be added to it. I've got new material on Edwin Ekdal, the third husband of Marguerite, that needs to be included. Um, I've got new material on the Pains. Uh, yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff.
I'd be
Whole
interested in
bunch of
the new
stuff.
material on the pains for sure.
Okay, well, stand by.
Well, Greg, I appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show. Is there a place where people can find any of your links?
Um, the forum you were talking about before, and I thank you for that, but I've actually closed it down. The reason I did that
When did
is
you do that? I was
because,
just on it last month.
yeah, start of the year, I closed it down.
The start of this year?
Uh, yep, yep.
No, there's no way I can still access it. I just logged into it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've left it up as an archive, but
Okay, okay.
there's no.
I was about to say I was just on it last month. There's no way you closed it down
Yeah,
at the
no,
beginning of the year.
it's still there. It's still there as a resource, but no one can post it anymore there. Um, I started that as a uh, I mean the name of it is the reason I started it. I wanted to get the case reopened, and I wasn't going to be a party to um, a forum that exists for its own sake, where you're just continually spinning wheels and regurgitating the same stuff over and over again. Uh,
That's what I was saying earlier. That's what I'm talking
yeah,
about.
yeah, yeah. And I closed it down because at some point you've got to say, okay, this hasn't worked the way I wanted it to. I'm not going to continue with it. But there is a lot of good research on there, and anyone who wants to go and check it out, please do. Um, Costs nothing to look it up. And if you do some deep digging, you'll find some absolutely wonderful stuff from the likes of Bart Camp, Ed Ladeau, Nick Purdy, and a whole bunch of other people I feel bad about not mentioning, but there's just too many to name. So
Well, Greg, I appreciate what you have done for the research community and what you've done giving me time to do this episode and other episodes as well too. I appreciate you giving me the time again. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.